Everyone wants to be the smartest person in the room. We celebrate intelligence like it is the ultimate advantage, the thing that solves everything, opens every door, explains every success. We tell children you are so smart as if it is the greatest gift we can give them. We build entire identities around it. We use it to explain our worth, justify our choices, predict our futures. Smart people succeed. That is the story. Intelligence is the variable. Everything else follows. But there is another story, quieter, less comfortable, almost never told. The story of the person who is genuinely, measurably, undeniably intelligent and is suffering because of it, not despite their intelligence. Because of it, the person who cannot turn their mind off at midnight, who sees the outcome of situations before they begin and cannot pretend otherwise, who understands people so clearly it becomes a kind of loneliness, who has so many ideas that executing any single one feels like a betrayal of all the others, who has been told their entire life that their intelligence is an advantage and has quietly suspected for years that nobody is telling the whole truth. Friedrich Nietzsche was one of these people, possibly the most lucid mind of the 19th century, and one of the most isolated, most misunderstood, most psychologically tormented human beings who ever lived. He did not write about intelligence as a gift. He wrote about it as a burden, a specific, recognizable, rarely acknowledged burden. Today, we go into the dark side, the part nobody talks about when they talk about high intelligence, the part that the IQ tests don't measure and the success stories don't mention. Stay until the end, because the final lesson is not pessimism. It is the most honest map I can give you for navigating what you are actually carrying. 1. The curse of seeing too clearly. Most people move through life with a comfortable degree of uncertainty. They don't know exactly how situations will unfold. They can't read every subtext in a conversation. They cannot see, within minutes of meeting someone, the precise pattern of how that person operates, their insecurities, their motivations, their likely behavior under pressure. This uncertainty is not stupidity. It is mercy. The highly intelligent person does not have this mercy. They see, quickly, clearly, often involuntarily, the friend who is performing loyalty but will not be there when it costs them something. The relationship that looks functional on the surface and is structurally broken underneath. The project with the fatal flaw that everyone else is too excited to notice. The conversation where what is being said and what is being meant are entirely different things. This clarity is, in certain contexts, an extraordinary advantage. But it comes with a cost that nobody discusses. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot pretend not to know what you know. You cannot participate in the comfortable shared fictions that most social environments run on the polite agreements, the unexamined assumptions, the collective pretense that everything is fine when it clearly isn't, without feeling, every single time, the specific friction of someone who knows they are performing a role in a play they can see through entirely. Nietzsche called this the philosopher's suffering, the suffering of the person for whom clarity is not optional. Most people can choose, when it is convenient, not to look too closely. The highly intelligent person does not have this choice. The looking happens automatically. And what is found consistently, reliably, is more complexity, more contradiction, more darkness than the world generally wants to acknowledge. This is not cynicism. It is a different visual range. And it makes certain kinds of ordinary comfort, the comfort of shared illusion, of simple narrative, of uncomplicated belonging, permanently unavailable. 2. The loneliness that intelligence builds around itself. Nietzsche wrote with a precision that only personal experience produces that the higher the mind, the more rarely it finds its equal. This is not arrogance. It is arithmetic. If genuine intellectual depth, the ability to sustain complex thought, to hold contradiction without resolving it prematurely, to engage with ideas at a level of rigor that most conversations don't require, exists in a relatively small percentage of people, then the person who requires this level of engagement to feel genuinely connected is, by pure mathematics, going to find it rarely. And in the absence of finding it, they will spend enormous amounts of time in conversations that feel like translation exercises, simplifying, softening, finding the version of what they actually think that will land without creating confusion or discomfort. They will smile and nod through exchanges that engage maybe 15% of what they are capable of thinking. They will become skilled at performing connection while experiencing, privately, the specific loneliness of someone who is present in a room but cannot fully arrive in it. And the terrible irony, the one Nietzsche felt most acutely, is that this loneliness is invisible. From the outside, the highly intelligent person often appears socially capable, sometimes even socially adept. They can read people well, they can navigate conversations skillfully, they can produce the responses that make interactions run smoothly. But inside, beneath the competent social surface, there is often a persistent, low-grade ache. The ache of not being fully met, of having a depth of inner life that almost never gets to be the actual content of a conversation, of carrying something that most of the interactions in your day simply do not have the capacity to touch. This is not solvable by trying harder to connect. It is the structural consequence of being built for a depth of engagement that most environments do not provide. 3. Overthinking as a prison with no visible walls. The same cognitive machinery that makes rapid, complex analysis possible does not have an off switch. This is the detail that people who romanticize high intelligence almost always miss. The mind that can hold 8 variables simultaneously while tracking their interactions and implications does not stop doing this when the problem is solved, does not stop doing this when there's no problem, does not stop doing this at midnight, at 3 in the morning, in the middle of what should be a relaxing Sunday. It simply continues, running analysis on whatever is available, on the conversation from Tuesday that contained an ambiguity that was never resolved, on the 17 possible interpretations of something someone said in passing, on the decision made 6 months ago and all the branching consequences still unfolding from it, on the future, not one version of it, but all the versions, mapped in parallel with probabilities attached. For most people, thinking is something they do when they need to. For the highly intelligent person, thinking is something that happens to them, continuously, often involuntarily, frequently at the worst possible times. Nietzsche described this as the mind that cannot rest in the herd, the mind that is constitutionally incapable of the comfortable, unreflective state that most people inhabit most of the time. And what this produces practically, daily, is exhaustion. Not the clean exhaustion of physical effort, the specific, grinding exhaustion of a machine that never stops running. That cannot stop, because the stopping mechanism requires a kind of cognitive simplicity that is no longer available. The highly intelligent person often appears calm, often appears composed, present, even relaxed. But inside, behind the composed surface, there is frequently a level of cognitive activity that would exhaust most people to witness, running constantly, on everything, without permission. 4. The paradox of too many possibilities. Here is one of the cruelest ironies of high intelligence. The same capacity that generates extraordinary options that can see multiple paths through any problem, that can identify solutions where others see only obstacles, that can generate 10 approaches to any challenge in the time most people generate one, also makes choosing between them agonizing, because you can see the value in each. You can see the cost of each. You can see what is lost in every direction you don't take. The person with fewer cognitive options does not experience this. They see 1 or 2 paths, they pick the better one, they move. The decision costs them something, but not much. The highly intelligent person sees the full landscape, every path, every consequence, every opportunity cost, every version of every future that each choice produces. And in seeing all of it, in being unable to not see all of it, the choosing becomes almost impossible. Not because they don't know what they want, but because they know, with agonizing precision, exactly what they are giving up with every choice they make. Nietzsche wrote about this as the burden of the person who can no longer operate on simple belief. The simple belief that this is the right path, that this is the correct choice, that everything will work out. The highly intelligent person cannot hold these simple beliefs with the uncritical conviction that makes them useful. They see the counter-arguments. They feel the uncertainty. They carry the weight of every abandoned possibility. And this, paradoxically, frequently produces less action than a far less intelligent person who simply cannot see the complexity and therefore moves with a confidence the intelligent person can never quite access. 5. The weight of knowing what most people are not ready to hear. This is the one that produces the specific kind of loneliness that cannot be explained to the people causing it. The highly intelligent person frequently knows things, not in the arrogant sense, not in the sense of having all the answers, in the very specific sense of having processed more information, held more variables, followed more chains of consequence, and arrived at conclusions that are simply further along than where the conversation currently is. And they face a choice, constantly, that most people never have to make. Say what they actually think, and experience the social consequences of being further ahead than the room is comfortable with. Or soften it, delay it. Find the version that will land without creating friction. Or say nothing at all. Most highly intelligent people, by adulthood, have learned to choose the third option with uncomfortable frequency. Not because they are cowards, because they have tried the first option enough times to know what it costs. The rolled eyes, the defensive reactions, the social cooling, the label too intense, too negative, too much that gets applied to the person who consistently says the thing the room was not ready to hear. Nietzsche paid this cost in full. His entire career was, in some sense, the experience of saying things the intellectual culture of his time was not ready to receive. And he was very nearly destroyed by it. Not dramatically, slowly, by isolation, by lack of recognition, by the specific grinding pain of producing work that he knew was significant and watching it meet, year after year, with indifference or incomprehension. He wrote that the price of thinking further than your time is the time itself you produce for a future that has not arrived yet. And the present, the actual, daily present in which you live, gives you almost nothing back. 6. The relationship between high intelligence and self-destruction. This is the section most people skip, and it is possibly the most important one. The correlation between high intelligence and self-destructive behavior, substance use, social isolation, depressive episodes, the specific recklessness of someone who has thought their way to the edge of nihilism and is not sure what stops the fall, is not coincidence. It is the logical consequence of a specific combination. The ability to see clearly, including the ability to see clearly that much of what most people find meaningful is constructed, arbitrary, held together by shared agreement rather than inherent truth, combined with the inability to simply choose not to see this. Most people can sustain meaning without examining its foundations too closely. They do not need to know why something matters. They simply experience it mattering. The highly intelligent person cannot stop at experience. They trace it back, examine the mechanism, identify the construction, and in doing so, not always, but often enough, they find themselves holding something they examined until it came apart in their hands. Nietzsche called this the death of God, not literally, philosophically. The moment when the structures that provided meaning, the inherited frameworks, the unexamined beliefs, the comfortable certainties are examined closely enough to reveal their construction. And when they reveal their construction, they lose their automatic authority. The highly intelligent person is more likely to reach this moment, and less equipped with the cognitive ability to simply return to the comfortable certainty they had before they looked. This is where the self-destruction enters. When meaning dissolves and nothing has yet been built to replace it, the options that numb the resulting emptiness become very attractive. Nietzsche himself was not immune to this. His last decade before the collapse that ended his productive life shows every sign of a person running on intellectual fumes. The scaffolding of meaning increasingly dependent on will alone, the price of seeing clearly taking its final toll. 7. Why the most intelligent people are often the last to be understood. History is full of them, the ones whose work was dismissed, ignored, or actively mocked during their lifetime, who died without seeing the recognition that was coming, who spent their most productive years working in conditions of profound non-acknowledgement. Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Van Gogh in a different domain but the same pattern, Mendel, whose foundational work in genetics was ignored for decades, Semmelweis, who discovered how to stop doctors from killing patients with unwashed hands and was institutionalized for the suggestion. The pattern is consistent enough to have a name. The phenomenon of the person who is simply too far ahead of the available context to be understood by it. But the pattern is also devastating in real time, because the person living inside it does not experience it as being ahead of their time. They experience it as failure, as irrelevance, as the specific personal rejection of the thing they have poured themselves into. and they must make a choice, often for years, sometimes for decades, that is one of the hardest choices available to a human being. To continue producing work for an audience that does not yet exist. To maintain belief in the value of what they are doing in the complete absence of external confirmation. To keep going, not because the world is telling them to, but because something internal, something that cannot be argued with, tells them the work is real. Nietzsche made this choice, and it cost him almost everything. But the work survived him, and the work changed everything. 8. The dark gifts, what high intelligence actually provides when understood correctly. After everything we have just walked through, the loneliness, the overthinking, the paralysis, the seeing too clearly, the being too far ahead, the structural difficulty of finding genuine connection, the relationship with self-destruction, the specific suffering of a mind that cannot rest, it would be reasonable to conclude that high intelligence is simply a curse. Nietzsche would not let you stop there, because the same capacity that produces all of this suffering when turned in the right direction, when understood correctly, when worked with rather than against, produces something that cannot be produced any other way. Depth of understanding that changes the questions available to an entire generation. Work that outlasts the conditions that made it painful to produce. The specific, irreplaceable contribution of the person who saw further and stayed long enough to write down what they saw. The clarity that makes social ease difficult also makes it possible to see through illusion to truth. The overthinking that makes rest impossible also makes it possible to hold complexity that simpler minds cannot sustain. The loneliness that makes belonging difficult also produces an inner life of extraordinary richness. The paralysis in front of too many possibilities also means a genuine respect for consequence that protects against the confident mistakes of the less examined life. Nietzsche's answer to the dark side of high intelligence was not to pretend it wasn't dark. It was to metabolize it, to take the suffering genuinely, honestly, without minimizing it, and ask what it is producing. What understanding is being built through this isolation? What is being seen through this painful clarity? What is being forged through this specific, costly, unrewarded persistence? And then to use it, not despite the darkness, through it.